the model that they used to transition to organic was destined to fail.
The best we can do is have some great models and examples of how to do it.
I have torn that thing apart. It was so poorly written.
Hello and welcome to the Permaculture Vine podcast. My name's Cormac Harkin, and today we have a roundtable on permaculture and local food systems. So we'll just do a round robin introductions. I'm Cormac Harkin, founder of Vine Permaculture and a permaculture designer. Pippa, do you want to go next?
Hi, I'm Pippa Chapman. I am author of Plant Lover's Backyard Forest Garden, and I'm a forest gardener and permaculture practitioner and teacher.
Graham?
Yes, my name is Graham Towerton. I am in Michigan in the United States, originally from Australia. I'm a permaculture designer and farm owner, market gardener.
Great. Christopher?
My name is Christopher Nesbitt. I'm a farmer and agroforester in Belize, and where I run the Maya Mountain Research Farm.
Great stuff. Thanks everybody for agreeing to come on today. So I'm in Northern Ireland. I forgot to mention that. Christopher, do you want to kick off there? Local food systems.
Yeah. So, it's something I think about a lot because of recent events. Unlike many countries, most of the countries in the Caribbean are overly dependent on imported food. The islands more so than Belize. Belize, we still produce a lot of food, but most of the food that is consumed here, it's available for purchase, is imported from around the world. Breakfast cereals from India, and chips from Trinidad, and chips from all over the place. A lot of American food, a lot of English food, etc. So I've been thinking a lot about local food systems, because one of the really bright sides of the pandemic was that people started thinking about how to grow their own food. As the economy contracted and people found themselves challenged to be able to afford purchasing food, we saw a sort of I guess you would say, a flowering of interest in local food models, and particularly in backyard gardening in Belize.
Papa, do you want to go next?
Yeah. I think I had a similar thing really in lockdown. Loads of people in the UK started trying to grow their own food, and I think what was really quite interesting was how quickly we ran out of seeds. There were so many people desperate to grow food, but there was no seeds. It's really hard to get hold of. So I think as part of looking at our local food resilience, really our local food systems, I've been looking more at how we can grow our own seed and form our own food, our vegetable seed banks really locally, because I think really it's great that there was that interest and that enthusiasm, and what a shame that getting hold of seeds was the limiting factor. So I think it made me sort of look at our resilience in a different way. It's not just about sharing skills and teaching people how to grow food, but even just making sure that we can get hold of the things that we need. So that was quite a big learning experience for me. I mean, we're lucky in that we've my husband in particular loves breeding vegetables, so we've probably got enough seed for the whole of West Yorkshire in our loft, of all sorts, potatoes, tomatoes, pumpkins. He just loves breeding all sorts, so we've got loads of seed. But in terms of trying to get hold of seed in the UK, we actually don't have very good locally grown seeds. And I know there are different organizations. There's the Seed Sovereignty Project, who are trying to look at getting small scale market gardeners to actually grow their own seed as well, and make that available for sale and share it with each other. But yeah, that was really interesting part that came out of local food systems for me, based on what happened in the pandemic.
Great stuff. Graham?
Yeah, similar experiences. I was actually on assignment in California when COVID hit. I was working in oil refining at the time, and the food shelves emptied, within hours. And I was in a rental property, very thankful that the person who owned it, had, I think, a permaculture mindset and had planted 20, 30, 40 different fruit trees on the property and lots of different herbs. And, I was still able to get hold of, a few seeds and stuff like that myself and plant and supplement a little bit. But, just it was a feeling of insecurity when I was away from, what is my home here in Michigan, where I had all of my stuff, all of my resources, my seed reserves, and I save seed and have been saving seed for 35, 40 years, including stuff that I grew in Australia and then brought it across the ocean with me and, propagated out for multiple generations now in order to develop, locally adapted seed. And so for me not to have access to my own stuff was, disconcerting, created that insecurity. And, then I wondered, okay, for the person that hasn't gone through all of those types of steps over 20, 30 years to learn how to save seed and grow plants, I wondered what level of insecurity that they had when they couldn't purchase stuff. But it wasn't just the seed. I mean, here in Michigan, we couldn't buy seed because our governor took the authoritarian step of shutting down all the nurseries and all of the seed selling locations and said that you couldn't buy plants and you couldn't buy seed, and did that through executive fiat. And, it was completely illogical from the perspective of trying to protect people from transmission of COVID, because most of the big box stores where all of these things are sold were all still open if you wanted to go buy screws and nails and lumber and stuff like that, but you couldn't go to the seed section or the plant section, which was just, insane from a public health, and disease prevention perspective. There was no logic to it. But there's been other events as well that have created a sense of insecurity in the supply chain here in North America. And a lot of things like natural events that have taken place, Cormac, where we've had some freezes in the deep south where all of the propagation takes place for a lot of the perennial plants, whether it's ornamentals or fruit trees. There's a big freeze in Texas about 3 years back and another fairly decent one last year, which wiped out a lot of the perennial plant stock and made it very, very difficult for people like myself who are landscapers to get hold of the trees even post-pandemic, in order to plant what we wanted for our customers. So what I've learned from these successive events that have threatened the food security chain or supply chain is that we need to bring everything local. So for me, again, I'm encouraging all of my own customers to save their seed, grow their own plants, and be secure for their annual vegetable production. But I'm also now developing my own nursery so that I can maintain a stock of plants literally in my own backyard to serve my customer needs, and learning how to do things that I've not had to do before, such as how to do grafting, how to root cuttings and stuff like that, so that I can propagate my own plants and not have to buy everything from nurseries that are far away.
Great stuff. For me, when you mentioned local food systems, it reminded me back of what do you call it? Chris Packham, was it, the guy in the UK? He basically had a ton of pears, and it was grown in Argentina, packaged in Thailand, and then this was in the UK. It's madness. And then there was an article in defending it, saying, well, that just shows how great we are, because we can pick pears and we can refrigerate them, and we can use all this energy to transport them to Thailand and make such wonderful produce, and then you can eat it in the UK. That was crazy. And then in researching it, the end I looked today, I didn't realize like Ireland imports something like 70,000 tons of potatoes. And it's just like, it doesn't make sense. And then we're importing potatoes like from Israel. So you're transporting it long distances, and it's like, this is crazy. And then the other fact that it was like 83% of fruit and vegetables in Ireland are imported. And it's like, that shouldn't be, because we have our climate is, you can't grow a lot here. So that was my my starting point. It was like, I couldn't believe it. It's not something I looked at before.
Very similar stories, Cormac. Coming from Australia, I've often wondered about the sense of importing food from Australia all the way to North America, but I've seen it happen. I've seen grapes come from Australia to here, citrus products, lamb as a meat from Australia and New Zealand here to the US. And while I could say that I might be proud of Australia for being able to do that, and innovate in their markets for their products, it makes no sense to me at all to see citrus on my shelves here when you start thinking about the fact that the vitamin C content starts disappearing as soon as you pick the fruit. Whether you freeze it or not, I can't believe that there's much nutritional value left in that food by the time it makes it all the way here and goes through all the different distribution processes. I've got to believe it's got to take 6 months to go from one end to the other of the food chain. And that's the thing that concerns me more. It's not just the availability of the food, but the nutritional value of it when it's being shipped, such vast distances. Even for the produce that is made domestically, it's all designed to survive the package and handling and transportation processes as opposed to providing human nutrition. So you've got examples of tomatoes for those of us who've been raised in Commonwealth countries. In any event, the tomatoes from California, I mean, they're not all vine ripened, right? They use ethylene gas, to ripen them fully before they package them and ship them. And so just the taste is not there, which implies to me that the plant nutrition is not there either, for consumption. And so for me, the biggest encouragement that I give to people that I do landscaping work for, with edible gardens, is to encourage them that the more food you have in your own backyard, it gives a security issue, but also a health and nutrition issue, which is equally, if not more important.
Yeah, I agree. We looked at opening a local produce shop in our town a few years ago, and unfortunately our feasibility study showed that there wasn't any food grown locally that we could sell in our shop. And I think that was quite a big shock to me at the time, because even though, like you were saying, Cormac, the percentage of food that is imported into the UK is scarily high. I think if suddenly all the food supplies shut off, we'd be in real trouble here. Particularly in my area, all we would really be able to eat was lamb because there's just about sheep on the hills, and that's about it. There's no vegetable growing anywhere near where I am, and that's quite a scary thought at the total lack in terms of preparation for being more self-sufficient. And I have spoken to someone in the UK. We have an organisation called Young Farmers. So the head of our local young farmers came to look at my hillside where I was planning to start my forest garden. This was about 15 years ago. And he just said, well, the thing is that the land around here is not, it's not for growing. The only thing it's good for is rearing sheep, and that was just like the opinion of farmers in this area. It's sheep or nothing. The land is not worth anything. And I have to say, I haven't invited him back to see 15 years later actually the huge amount of things that we've managed to grow on our northwest facing very steep slope with hardly any topsoil. But I think it's really encouraging that through all sorts of different permaculture growing and farming techniques, we've built topsoil and we've planted appropriate crops, and we've got a huge diversity of food growing on our hillside where previously there was just sheep. So even though currently at the moment, if tomorrow food supplies shut off, we would we wouldn't have much to eat. I like to think that at least the solutions are there for the future.
Pippa, are you growing fruit as well as vegetables then?
Yes, yeah, we have. I mean, where we are, it's quite cold in Yorkshire, and it's a northwest facing hill as well, so we don't get much sun most of the year. And so we grow apples, pears, plums, cherries, green gages, things like that. We've tried mulberries, but they haven't done well. We've tried a few different types of nut. We've got hazelnuts, but we have lots of squirrels here, so we hardly ever see any nuts. But yeah, we have grown, you know, lots of soft fruit, blackcurrants, raspberries, tayberries, and then we have, you know, like cornelian cherries and you know, sort of some of the more unusual. Mahonia does really well here, like the Oregon grape. Yeah.
Yeah, so it sounds very similar to my Michigan climate, where perhaps you maybe don't get as much snow as I get here, but yeah, those are the types of crops that grow well here, all of those.
Yeah, yeah, and they have done really well, and it's been really nice in the areas we planted up our hillside as patches of forest garden, so it's quite a lot of open grassland that we have left totally unmanaged. And over the 15 years, it's been amazing to see the wildlife come in. So the first few trees that we planted, suddenly there were small birds that had never been there before because it had just been grazed and there was nothing to perch on, basically, because it was all short grass. And now there's birds of all different sizes. We've had buzzards, and we had a kestrel who nested in a tree in the corner of the field. You know, we've had some amazing things. We've got badgers now as well. So it's just been really fantastic just to leave those bits of open grass as well for things like owls. You know, they can hunt over the long grass, to see all that wildlife come in that you just don't get where the land is used for grazing, because there isn't anything there for wildlife really other than sheep.
So we've identified the problems, or some of them anyway. So we have all these sort of man-made disasters, weather disasters. We've identified seed shortages, plant shortages, poor growing conditions, traditional mindsets of you can't grow there. So any solutions? And like Pippa, you touched on solutions there. You just went and did it yourself. So you can go do it your own garden or your own land, find a community garden, and then getting access to land. How is this stuff scalable? And how do we, as permaculture people, how do we promote that?
Well, yeah, I'll just kind of so I don't fall asleep. No, just kidding. One of the things that we find is we're mostly working on trees. The background behind me is a section of our food forest. There's about 30 different species of plants in there that are useful to us. The structure looks like a primary habitat, but it's actually a food forest. There's lots of food and marketable medicinal crops in there, etc. So one of the things that we're facing in Belize, which is still of a problem, because we didn't go to the bottom of the problem bin. One of the problems that we're having is that local food systems are being dismantled intentionally by agrochemical companies who are convincing farmers that they need herbicides. And they're taking millennia. We work primarily with Maya farmers. 2 years ago, we were working in 3 border communities for an EU funded project, basically doing canvassing to find out farmers what practices they were using for maize and beans production, and also looking at the market, the informal market that they were shipping across the border into Guatemala, and also what opportunities were presented in the formal market by shipping through Belize for their produce. And one of the things that we found was that of the 90 farmers that we interviewed, only one farmer had good practices, but he still used herbicide once every year. And he did it because he was told that he had to. Now I worked with farmers back in the 1990s and early 2000s. I managed something called the Toledo Cacao Growers Association. I worked for a company called Green and Blacks, which is a UK-based chocolate company. And at that time, the board of directors, we had meetings about this. The feeling was that people who used herbicide in their farm were either a combination of stupid or lazy. And now the paradigm has shifted. Not one farmer did we meet of the 90 farmers we talked with that wasn't using herbicides annually. Some farmers were using herbicides up to 5 or 6 times for a single corn crop. And a list of herbicides that we use included things like 2,4-D that you can't even buy in the countries that produce them. So this is sort of the backdrop to some of the problems that we have with local food production in the region. All across Central America, we have this issue of this believing that we need these chemicals that, and in fact, the language, the word in Quechua Maya for medicine and poison are very, very similar. And so the people selling the chemicals figured that out and started referring to these poisons as medicine. So people are using medicine, and medicine has to be good, right? And so that's the situation we find ourselves in. So we're watching millennia of accumulated knowledge in local food production being dismantled in the last 30 years. And it's absolutely horrifying because it takes basically 4 or 5 growing seasons, maybe 2.5 years, 3 years, to utterly dismantle a community's ability to produce food in appropriate ways that were traditionally used. You displace that knowledge with this purchased fertility, and it's really difficult to undo that, to put the genie back in the bottle. And so that's part of the problem that we see here. I just wanted to get to the very bottom of the barrel of problems before we move on to solutions, and that's the bugaboo that keeps me up at night.
Yeah, I can support that one. Here we've got now decades of experience, from when that transition took place, Christopher. When I do consultations with folks that are, coming to permaculture for the first time, a lot of them are coming from the premise that, they're 2 or perhaps 3 generations removed when people were responsible for growing all of their own family's food and providing for their own animals. And, come with the basis of, well, how do you avoid using chemicals? Because we don't know any other way, and so a lot of my efforts are associated with trying to demonstrate what it is that I do, on my own property in terms of how I manage my soil fertility and how I manage, pest control without using any chemicals at all. And, I've always, for every year that I've been a farmer, I've never used any herbicides or pesticides. And a lot of people respond in disbelief, when I say that, I don't use any chemicals and that I don't need to, because the experts, supposedly have, told them that it's necessary. And especially when you've got a lot of service-based companies here that are, providing, land care services, lawn care services. It's something, like you said, it's purchased, as a service. For people to manage their properties, and all those companies are using the chemicals as a part of what they do. So I just try to encourage people that, hey, I've got my proof, of what I do in terms of fertility management and pest control using permaculture practices, and it's effective. And teach people how to do the same thing, and let them know that it may take a few years to get everything back in balance, because if they've got a pesticide controlled property, then they're going to need to reestablish nature's systems, and that might take some time to overcome, chemical toxicity in the soil. Might take some time to rebalance all the different insect populations and wildlife. Pippa, just like you mentioned, for me, the birds were the first thing that came back to my property as soon as all the farming activities stopped around me. Where it was just monoculture, soybean and corn and wheat on rotation. As soon as that practice stopped, and as soon as I started planting other plants for the birds to enjoy, they all came back. And now I have probably 30 or 40 different varieties of birds on my small 7-acre property. And that's taken 10 years, to reach the point that it has now. It's not something that happened overnight, and it was a concerted effort, to put in place all the different plants, etc., to start bringing that wildlife in here. And as a result of bringing in the birds, guess what? My insect population is more balanced now as well, because they're coming here for the food of all the insects that are here. By bringing in all of the beneficial insects using, pollinator attracting plants, all the floral stuff that's in my gardens, I've now got, I think, what is a really good balance of insect population, where some of the predator insects are now on my property, with praying mantises and dragonflies and other insects that I call the lions and tigers and bears of the insect world, are here at my place. And now I'm not having as many problems with some of the pest insects that used to predate my crops. So I just try to encourage people that, those solutions are entirely possible, that they're practical. And, I'll admit that I am actually a lazy gardener, and, any work that I can avoid myself, I will. And, I'm letting nature take care of most of the insect control and pest control on my property now. So I don't have to do that work, and I'm not spending any money on chemicals.
Yeah, I think there's some really successful sort of systems that we can use now. There's been more and more research done over the last decade or so on sort of agroforestry systems or organic no-till systems. So I think it's really great that research and evidence has been building up over the last few years, and I think definitely in the UK I've noticed more and more I guess more small scale market gardens or small farms rather than large scale farms have started to pop up. So producing, organic food that has been grown, we're using permaculture methods, and I think it's just that we're never going to get that. I can't imagine on the huge mega farm scale that some farming is done these days, because that kind of scale just doesn't really work, I don't feel, in permaculture systems, where you're just trying to have maybe one or two farmers looking after thousands of acres, because if you're gardening in tune with nature, you definitely need more than one or two people to do it. But I think on a small scale, and in terms of looking at our future and our food security in the future, I think it is going to have to be more small farms, so that we can actually look at looking after nature alongside farming. And I just don't see that really that can be achieved on a massive scale.
Well, one thing, Graham, that I find valuable is for people in the position that you're in, where you're surrounded by farmers doing something poorly conceived and long-term detrimental, is to provide a viable alternative. And the way that you get that information across is not through podcasts and articles and YouTube videos. It's through bringing farmers to see what's working. So your farm has tremendous value for your neighbors, because they can say, well, this is what I'm doing. And you can write, we've all got pretty big vocabularies. We could probably write beautiful flowery things about what we're doing. But the proof is in the pudding, so to speak. You get a farmer to come look at your farm, it's either productive or it's not. And all the large vocabulary is not going to help you there, because they're going to look at your farm. If it's not working, it's not working. So having something that like your farm that actually is working is incredibly valuable.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, it's a very busy road that I've got running in front of me, and we actually put a sign up to sell the excess eggs from our chickens, and that brings people onto the property. And as soon as they hear, they start looking around, especially in the spring and the summer when everything is flowering and leafed out. They start noticing all of the different trees, and then they start asking questions like, "What are you growing?" And it's like, "Well, come take a look." And sometimes that come take a look has been 2 hours, and people get fascinated with, all of the different things that are growing. And then they start asking questions. Well, like, okay, how much, do you produce? My favorite examples are my 2 peach trees that reached, a level of maturity 2 years ago, where off 2 trees, we harvested 200 pounds, or call it, 80, 90 kilos of peaches. And, then I demonstrated that, we had more peaches than we really knew what to do with, just from that harvest from 2 trees. So we made every kind of peach product that we could think of to, stick in, preservation, peach pie, peach cobbler, whole peaches, frozen, etc. And that then became the basis of us having peaches literally all through winter. The next year it was the apples. The apple trees reached maturity, and we produced 500 or 600 pounds of peaches off 5 or 6 trees. And so, with that, there's an economic payback, obviously, that's important for people to recognize. And I say, look, how much would 200 pounds of peaches cost you in the grocery store? Well, first, no one would ever buy that many in the grocery store because it's too expensive. And literally here we've had peach prices of $5 per pound. So I look at that's $1,000 worth of fruit that I've produced essentially for free. Just the planting and the labor for management. And then that's a conversation that you can have with people to show it's worthwhile to do this because you're producing a yield. And then I go the next step and show them all the things that I'm growing underneath my peach trees as well. The strawberries, the blueberries, the raspberries, the lettuce, the daylilies, the hostas, etc. in the permaculture system and guild, where I'm now getting all of these additional yields that take place in my peach orchard. And then I give them the example of, go to any of the surrounding orchards. We have a lot of apple production here in this area, and see what have they got growing underneath their apple trees. Well, nothing. They've got grass, and that's it, because that's the way a traditional orchard is managed. And so my main aspect of demonstration that in the 200 square feet, we'll call it 20 square meters of land that I've got dedicated to those 2 peach trees, I'm producing 7, 8, 10 different yields every year, including the peaches from the 2 canopy trees. And then that starts to become practical for people to understand that they can do that in their own backyard. They don't need to have acres and acres and acres of land available to them in order to be effective in producing, some food for their home and for their family. And, if the average, house lot here is 1/8 of an acre, sometimes as low as a 1/16 of an acre of land, then it gives them hope that they're able to do that in their own backyards, just with a few fruit trees and a few other things underneath it.
It was really great when, I guess similar to you, when we've had open days at our small holding in the past, and people have gone up and looked at the forest garden and been really inspired by, like you say, the many layers of growing all sorts of different fruit and herbs and perennial vegetables. And then next to our house we had a small yard, and that was really where we grew a much smaller version of the forest garden. So really only in a few beds that were maybe 6 square meters, something like that. And that was where people would be asking, what varieties of dwarf fruit trees were we growing, and what are the best kind of raspberries to grow in a small garden. And I think that even though they'd kind of gone and seen the larger scale forest garden and found that really inspiring, what they'd really wanted to ask 1,000,001 questions about was how do they do that in their own garden. And I think that is what which really led me down the kind of path of concentrating on small scale forest gardening, because I think there's a real potential. There's a lot of gardens in the UK, a lot of space that could be used to grow food, but in a way that is gardening for wildlife, and using that multi-layered system to bring more wildlife into people's gardens as well. So I think it's really great, like you say, for people to come and have a look around, but also to see that they can achieve that in a small garden as well. They don't need acres and acres of land. Although I wish there was more forest gardening on acres and acres of land in this country, definitely, or globally. And I've seen some really interesting new examples near us now of sort of alley cropping, and particularly, as I mentioned, there's a lot of sheep around where I am, and I've seen some really great designs using sheep within that system of rows of agroforestry, of forest gardening. And I would be really interested to know in the future, whether how much of an impact on yield of lamb do you get by adding in the fruit trees, and how much extra in terms of the fruit and vegetables do you get alongside the sheep? Will the research sway farmers towards that way of farming? Is that something that will be taken on more widely in this area? Really, I think it'll solve a lot of problems. We live in steep-sided valleys which have a lot of flooding issues, and the solution is plant more trees. So there's so many different ways in which using forest gardening to grow food in our local area would really help.
You mentioned research there. Sorry, go ahead.
I was just going to say, I love the idea of forest gardening in general, but in a place like England where you have such interesting, I don't know, high population density, a lot of imported food, and it would obviate the need to import a lot of food. And then of course the energy return on energy invested over time as your agroforestry starts to create that biological flywheel where it's producing more and more, and your energy that you need to maintain it decreases and decreases. It's really, really valuable, and it's nice to hear about that. I like the idea also that you were talking about sheep being involved, and using sheep to boost production, and using some of your produce for your sheep, etc. It's nice. We just got into sheep last year, so we've got 17 Dorper sheep, and they are lots and lots of work, and we're in the middle of a brutal dry season, so we have to cut and carry forage, which we're using a lot of tree crops for that. So anyway, I got excited about the concept of agroforestry in the UK. So.
Well, yeah, you were just asking about research, Cormac. There's a project just starting near me, and if I'm honest, I can't remember the name of it, so I'll have to find that out and let you know. So hopefully you can put it in the show notes. But they are starting an agroforestry project right on top of the moors near me in Yorkshire. So very challenging growing conditions, really, where, as I say, people would just say it would be insane to try and put anything other than sheep. So he, the main person leading the project, he's got a research background, so he's taken all of the baseline data of the land and the climate and biodiversity surveys and everything before he started planting. And I think they will only be now in maybe 18 months into the project, so obviously there's no big results yet to say how that's gone, but he is very much getting other researchers involved and encouraging more people to come on board, and if they want to do their PhD project around something on the farm, he's very happy to accommodate that, and he's very much looking at how they can gather that data to I guess inform and persuade other farmers in the local area and with similar conditions to take that on board and try and farm in a similar way. So I'm really interested to see how that project plays out and what the figures show, because he's measuring not just yields, he's measuring biodiversity change as well and things like that. So it's showing the importance that it's not just the outputs and not just the food and what we can take from the land. It's what we can benefits we can give in terms of wildlife and biodiversity as well.
So I think that's great. My problem is they don't like when they push stuff. Have you seen the article recently about homegrown foods, like 5 times the carbon footprint of?
Yeah.
I'd like to speak to that particular article because it was written here in my home state. In Michigan. The University of Michigan wrote it, and I have torn that thing apart. It was so poorly written, and the data that they had in it basically said, well, if you exclude this one property that skewed all of the data, all of the home-based gardens and organic gardens would be on par with commercial conventional agriculture. And then they went on to explain why that particular property was skewed so badly because of poor management practices for their inputs for the property. And so I looked at that and went, okay, this article was created to support a narrative. It wasn't created to
Yeah.
actually demonstrate data. But what it did was it captured so much attention with people who just threw up their hands in the air and said, well, guess what? We can't have gardens now, because the University of Michigan said, that it's bad for the environment, that it's bad for carbon footprint. When in fact, the opposite is true, completely the opposite is true. I don't have inputs to my property, I don't, because I don't need them.
Yeah, and they included all sorts of stuff like paving, which most people reuse. They're using pallets. They're using stuff that was destined for the bin. They're actually saving stuff. So my point was that basically that guy's research it's never going to be blown up and saying, look, this is the definitive solution. It's garbage like that article that's blown up.
Yes,
it's sensational. It's
clickbait.
And then the powers that be as well. Select, like, look what they did with Sri Lanka. They just switched off the fertilizers overnight. They just said, right, you aren't getting any. They're trying it here now in Holland. In Europe, just saying, right, you aren't getting nitrogen. We have to stop all this stuff. And they're not actually looking at research the guys doing and saying, right, let's follow that model. It's whatever's politically expedient at the time. And they never ever look at them things that are actually working and prove to be working.
The problem that Sri Lanka had is that they had a noble idea, and they were looking at the amount of money that was going out of the country to bring in inputs. And the idea was to wean themselves of those inputs, but they didn't follow that up with a combination of re-education. And I don't mean that in the let's send them to the re-education camps, but I'm fully in favor of that for some of these people. That's a joke, humor. They go straight to the wall. No, just kidding. The problem is there wasn't an idea of how to transition, how to wean people off of this new model, relatively new model that they've been introduced to that displaced traditional models. And, we can't lie, the Green Revolution increased yields per acre, et cetera, for X amount of time. And then, of course, everything went back into decline to the baseline levels and then went below that, which is why farmers are on the treadmill of always buying more inputs to try and maintain that high level of production they got initially. And so Sri Lanka, the model that they used to transition to organic was destined to fail because there was no extension or education or anything. There was no ability in the country to reference, this is what your grandparents did. And that's true everywhere. I mean, so I know I have no farmers in the United States, Indiana and Illinois that are corn farmers, and they're all on the treadmill because that works. And there's not a big enough education about how alternatives so Sri Lanka really bothers me because that's come up in many conversations of why organic can't work. Look at Sri Lanka. And it wasn't so much that Sri Lanka was wrong, it was the way they did it. There was no transition, there was no cover crops, there was no companion cropping, there's none of that training. All that information that had been displaced for 30, 40 years, there was no way to present it back.
Yeah, that's true. And, if you're going to convert any farm from conventional agriculture to organic agriculture, there's an investment that needs to be made of time in order for that transition to take place, and education to change the practices for agriculture completely different. And without that education process being available, even here in the United States, with all of the resources that are existing for education, you still have to spend time with that person on their farm to show them this is what needs to be done. And you can read all the books, but it also is important to provide direct consulting to people so that you can show them, here are the problems that you could encounter. And these are the organic solutions that are available to you. And you need to present that information up front so that they recognize that there's a big steep learning curve and hump to go through before they're going to be able to manage the systems on an ongoing basis. And there's a reason I think that to get your farm certified here it takes 3 years, because it's probably going to take you 3 years to learn all the practices and get them well understood at least that long before you become good at organic farming. But I don't believe for a second that if you take that approach of converting to organic farming, that you're going to sacrifice anything in terms of yield or productivity or profitability. If it's managed well, you can make as much or more out of organic farming as you can from any other system of agriculture. And permaculture for me obviously is the important cap to all of that. A form of organic agriculture that just multiplies yields in the same space. I've got good friends who are corn farmers who plant 16,000 acres of corn, and their idea of biodiversity is to put sorghum in the corners of their pivot irrigation. And I'm like, okay, that's great, but let's look at what else can be grown that's going to improve the fertility of the soil, etc. And they don't want to change because, like you said, Christopher, what they have works. It's easy for them to manage. They've established a system over many, many years of doing it, and the cost of change is something that they don't want to bear.
Yeah, and I would add that they're not. You say it works, but they are suffering because there's a cost somewhere else that's not affecting them.
Well, for certainty, but here's the other part of it, right? When I reference that friend of mine that farms 16,000 acres, he's bought all of his equipment. So his big John Deere tractors. Some of those are $500,000 investments, and to go to your point, Pippa, about the fact that the type of agriculture and permaculture and other sustainable practices don't really fit on a large scale, is that $500,000 piece of equipment becomes a big paperweight as soon as you start looking at small scale farming, because you can't just use that equipment in any other form of agriculture except broad scale monoculture cropping. And so that's really, I think, the pain that stops a lot of people from making the transitions, that they start looking at all the wasted capital that they might have, that's been devoted to just growing 2 or 3 crops a year, and can't imagine doing anything else.
So 2 sort of things. How do we get people on the land who want to farm? Any ideas? I don't own land, but I'd love to be able to farm 5 or 6 acres. But for me here, that's you're talking 20 grand an acre, so that's 120 grand straight off the bat.
Yeah.
And it's like you can't get a mortgage for it, you can't get a loan for it. I know farmers here as well won't even let you on their land. Their farmers are, I don't know if it's the same the worldwide, but here it's just they wouldn't give you half an acre in case you done something well on that half acre and showed them up. There's this sort of backward mentality. They'd rather see it lie to waste than someone make use of it. It's a strange sort of so for me, it's difficult to get on the land to actually do that.
I think part of what we offer Cormac with permaculture, and this is what Pippa is doing. She's using land that's marginal at best, right? The land that I've got, started as 2.3 acres. It was keyholed around me as they split off all of the corn acreage to a neighboring farmer. And, my land is largely occupied by buildings, concrete, barns, etc. And, I've had to find my niches in amongst that in order to be successful with what I do. In the case of the United States, we've got, literally billions of acres of land, and the US Department of Agriculture claims that we've got maybe 1 billion acres of arable land available to us, and depending on which reports you look at, you'll talk about hundreds of millions of acres of corn and soybeans and these other crops that are grown in that arable land. But then the folks who I think are making the best inroads into sustainable agriculture are the ones who are actually taking degraded lands, marginal lands, land that could not be used for monoculture cropping, and then making a really, really good attempt to improve the soil fertility first, manage their water systems second, and then start growing a large biodiversity of other crops, first to support their family, and then second to create a market. And I think that approach works simply because here, at least in the United States, there's almost an infinite amount of land that you can buy for $500 or $1,000 an acre in areas which are arid or very marginal, and people can then afford that and make a start. Where I'm located, the land is probably the same. It's $20,000 an acre for farmland right now, and there's not too many people can write that check. And like you said, it's very difficult to get a mortgage for just purchase of land. So, I think the people, again, like Pippa, who've, taken an approach of using some marginal land where the people say it's only good for sheep. Well, prove them wrong and, and grow all the things that, can be grown. And then you'll have a lot more people take notice of that and go, well, how do we do that too? Well, you can buy those 5 acres over there for $1,000. That's a different story.
Yeah, I think the farm that I was talking about where they're doing the research, that is actually land that is owned by Yorkshire Water, so a water company, and they are leasing him the land on a long-term lease. So sometimes you can find little bits of land like that where a company owns it, whether that's just historically because they own it, or there's something on that land that they need to access where they don't really need to use the land. So sometimes you can find pieces like that. And also I've heard of people sort of coming together, so maybe even sort of 20, 30 plus people coming together and buying a much bigger piece of land, because the bigger pieces of land can sometimes be quite a bit cheaper per acre. Like if you just want to buy 1 acre, that's going to be quite expensive, but if it's 100 acres, it can sometimes then become more affordable. So yeah, it is difficult. I'm not going to say it's easy, particularly in certain parts of the UK. It's just insane how I've been looking at a piece of land that came up for sale near us, and it's got no planning permission for housing. You can't even get permission to put a caravan on it to stay in as a holiday home, and they're wanting £200,000, and it's 2 acres. So, and half of it used to be an old rubbish dump that nobody really knows what's in it. So that just kind of shows you the insanity of land prices at the moment. Yeah,
That's actually an opportunity that presents itself. I did this quite by accident, but I bought a piece of land when I was 22 because it was rotten cheap. I mean, I bought 48 acres of land for less than $15,000 US. The reason it was cheap is because it was cattle land that was really degraded, and it was a old citrus farm that was at the end of its productive lifespan. And so these degraded pieces of land actually offer opportunities for young people to access land, because you can do something with that land. You just can't do the same thing that destroyed it in the first place. So it's marginal land is actually a fairly good design strategy if you're young. I'm 57 now, so I don't think I'd want to, start out on this adventure at my age that I have now. I can continue it, but it is an opportunity. One of these things is there are billions of degraded agricultural acres of land out there that offer opportunities for people. It's just a question of how degraded, what degraded it. Like if it's cattle land, my advice for anybody considering doing degraded cattle land in the neotropics is just don't walk away. There's nothing you can do with that in the scale of a human lifespan. But in terms of an abandoned citrus plantation or abandoned banana plantation or sugar cane land, this is land that could be converted into agroforestry relatively easy, because the soil structure itself isn't as damaged as cattle are do.
So what solutions have we got there? We have sort of marginal land, re-educate and try and persuade people to move by showing them properties. Yep, small scale solutions. How does that all scale up? They solve local supply, and how do you get the politicians on board?
Oh,
great question. I know it sounds quite negative, but I sometimes think with these solutions that the best we can do is have some great models and examples of how to do it, but
Mhm.
the reality is, until we're absolutely desperate and nobody's going to ship food to us anymore, I don't think people will take them up. I know that might seem like a negative way to look at it, but I think when there's easy solutions that are very profitable, it's very, very difficult to convince people to change the way that they do things, and particularly in the UK at the moment. I know elections may be coming up soon, but I honestly don't think that whoever I voted for would in any way sort of suddenly scale up regenerative farming in the UK. So I'm not sure that politicians are really the way to go. I think you might be kind of wasting your breath, really.
Yeah, I'm inclined to agree with that assessment. You know, the politicians are really only going to show an interest in it if it enables them to get more photo opportunities or votes in an election. But I do have some positive aspects of this that, you know, I think is a counterpoint. I've recently toured two very urban permaculture demonstration facilities in Cleveland, in Ohio. And one example was a lady who basically took over the building that her parents used to use for a dry cleaning business, has converted all of the land around that building to high tunnels and, you know, permaculture gardens, fruit trees, guilds, etc. And it's very visible on a main road through this very urban area. There is a school across the road where she used to attend high school, and she's inviting the students to come there and learn about permaculture straight out of high school. She's turned the building into a business incubator where she can then show the students, you know, here's what you can do with a business. And so she's walked me through her community where a lot of the houses have been torn down because they were abandoned and no longer needed, couldn't be sold. And so all of those lots are now available for a couple $100s. And she's like, if we can get the funds together, we can convert each one of these lots into a food forest and then further work out into the community and demonstrate that this is community garden space that's available. And so with that, I'm very confident that in some of these urban areas that there can actually be really, really positive demonstration capabilities provided, you know, to lots and lots of people about how to do this on a small scale in your own gardens. And in that particular case, the politicians are jumping all over it because they have got desperation, as you mentioned, Pippa, for wanting to address, you know, some critical issues in terms of food deserts in these larger cities where you cannot buy groceries without traveling for miles and miles and miles, let alone any kind of, you know, nutritious raw foods. And so they've been promoting it, and they've been actually personally putting funding into these projects, you know, where the politicians are using some of their own money, not just government money or taxpayer dollars. You know, they've been contributing to it because they see the benefit within their own community. So to me, that was extremely positive as an example that we can look forward to in the future.
Great stuff. Guys, that's about an hour. So just want to just go once round, any final thoughts, and they tell us where people can find you about projects you have on. Graham, do you want to go first there?
Yeah, you bet. So yeah, my website is Permaculture Adventures Michigan, permacultureadventuresmi.com. I am a designer also for Food Forest Abundance on contract, and you can find that website as foodforestabundance.com. Projects that I'm working on, at any given time, I have probably 5 or 6 designs that I'm working on for Food Forest Abundance. I also have my own projects that I do locally. I've got about 10 customers this year for landscape project work, focused in Michigan and northern Indiana. So that's what I'll be doing this year.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, I'm mostly posting on Instagram and Facebook. So on Instagram, I'm Pippa Chapman _ those plant people, and on Facebook, just Pippa Chapman. And yeah, I just do I do a range of different forest gardens and permaculture gardens. So some are private clients, some are commercial gardens, and I have some big exciting projects that I'll be able to share with everyone next year, but I'm yeah, top secret until autumn 2025. But yeah, I post a lot of pictures all the time and short videos. I do have a YouTube channel, but we moved house about 18 months ago and I haven't managed to release any videos in that time. It's all been a bit chaotic. So yeah, I have a YouTube channel, Those Plant People, as well.
Great stuff. Christopher?
Well, before we go, Pippa and Graham, it's been a pleasure sitting on this council with the two of you, and of course Cormac as well. Cormac's old school, I see him all the time, but it was very nice doing this. It was inspirational to hear of your work. My wife Selene and I, we do farming in San Pedro, Colombia, Toledo district of Belize in the south. We live about 2 miles upriver from a village. We don't have a road. You have to come in by canoe, which is not too bad right now because it's dry season, but in the rainy season can be hard work. So we mostly focused on agroforestry. We decided to get into sheep because I don't know why we got into sheep. It's lots of fun. It's a lot of work, particularly right now. We're doing a lot of cut and carry forage for them. We're mostly focused on that. We work in energy poverty as well. We do photovoltaic systems, village level water pumping systems, schools, etc. But we're day to day, we just do farming, and we wander around in our we have about 30 acres under some form of management, not all of it really well, collecting food and facilitating and fostering and moving nutrients around. And that's what we do. We have a web page, but that died during the pandemic, and I've just never bothered to revive it because we haven't started accepting students again, and we should probably think about that. And we've gotten used to basically every day is like waking up in the Blue Lagoon, and we're every day is sort of clothing optional, and having students puts a hamper on that. So we've gotten used to that. But yeah, we're getting that. So we don't have any web page right now, but we do have a Facebook page under Maya Mountain Research Farm. And I like Pippa. I try and load a couple videos or pictures a month in there to keep people aware that we exist, and because we're all of us twirling away in our own levels of obscurity, and it's nice to be able to meet kindred spirits, etc., like in this exercise we've just completed. So.
That's
awesome.
great.
Yeah, thank you also, Christopher, Pippa. It's been a pleasure to meet you both for the first time.
Yeah, it's been great opportunity to chat.
Well, thanks very much, everybody. Keep up the good work.
Thank you, Cormac.
And for me, I have finepermaculture.com. Might as well mention that. And check out the link PDCD Pro to see our latest course on learning permaculture digital design. Build a website and build plant guilds using Gilda. So thanks very much, guys. And thanks very much, everybody, for listening. That's been the Permaculture Vine, and we'll see you all next week. Thanks.
Cheers.
Bye.